Welcome to Spotlight Sessions, where we shine a
What's
light
your
on
story?
incredible. What does accessibility mean to you?
What's your mission? Welcome all to accessiBe's Spotlight Sessions, where we shine a light on incredible individuals and organizations and the work that they do. I'm your host, Josh Basil. I'm a C4-5 quadriplegic, paralyzed below my shoulders, and a power wheelchair user. I'm the community relations manager at accessiBe and a passionate disability rights advocate and trial attorney focused on breaking down barriers to access and inclusion for people with disabilities. Today on accessiBe's Spotlight Sessions, we're joined by Samantha Renke, a broadcaster, actress, and disability consultant. Welcome, Samantha.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. Now, I don't want to ruin the illusion, but we've had quite a few technical difficulties, a lot of it being on my part, but I did warn you that I am horrendous when it comes to technology, so I'm just really grateful that we managed to get it sorted. And I am from the UK, if you can't already tell by my accent, and I have quintessentially brought my cup of tea with me, with milk. So yes, I think we're all set to go, aren't we?
Well, we made it happen. We got through the issues, and we're here, and that's what matters. We made it happen. So I'd love for you to tell us more about yourself and your story.
Gosh, have you got 20 hours? No, I'm joking. I'm not someone who can normally condense my life story into a few moments. So I'll give you the highlight. So yes, my name is Samantha Renke. I wear many hats. So I'm a broadcaster, podcaster, writer, activist. I have many strings to my bows, and I'm sure that a lot of your listeners and viewers will recognize and resonate. I think when you have a disability, although I was very much brought up from a working class background, so a family not necessarily with a lot of money, but I got in. The ethos of our family was work hard and work your way up the ladder, irrespective of having a disability. And I've definitely taken that to heart growing up and throughout my life. And I say yes to opportunities. I tend to say yes to opportunities and then sit there holding a bottle of wine and thinking, what have I just done? What have I said yes to? I don't know if you've watched that episode of Friends where Joey lies on his resume and he's like, yeah, I can do this. I can ride a horse. I'm a bit like that. I'm like, yeah, sure, I can speak Mandarin. And then think, oh my goodness, what have I just done? But it's, my yes attitude is proven quite fruitful through my career, and it has afforded me those many strings to my bows. But I also think, as a disabled woman, as a physically disabled woman who was born with a rare genetic condition called Osteogenesis Imperfector, it's a collagen deficiency, so it predominantly impacts the collagen in your body, which is mostly seen in your skeleton. So it's more often referred to, particularly in the UK, as brittle bones, because I've had around 200 fractures in my life. But it impacts every particle of your body, because collagen is actually in pretty much everything. So I've been diagnosed with that from birth. But going back to why I have such a plethora of accolades under my bow is because I think disabled people are often not afforded the same opportunities as non-disabled people. So I think there's always been that innate sense of wanting to achieve, because that was what I was brought up with, but also that fear. Not only it goes deeper than a fear of missing out. I think that's something that a lot of maybe young disabled people will experience, the fear of not being able to do the same things as their peers. And I definitely experienced that. But I think as a disabled adult, the fear of, work opportunities, wanting to work and doing it because you enjoy the work that you do. But not, having those doors open as frequently. So yes, I wear many hats, and I've got many, wonderful accolades, but
It's your spirit.
yeah.
It's really your spirit that can't say no, because I feel like the only person that's going to stop you is you.
Yeah, but I think I just turned 38. I had to think about that then. So I'm a Capricorn Queen, which says a lot about my work ethos, because apparently Capricorns are very much, stoic go-getters. in life. But I think although I have always been, particularly in my late teens and early 20s and mid 20s, that yes person, I actually, when I wrote my memoir, was it last year? I wrote a memoir, You Are the Best Thing Since Sliced Bread. Oh my goodness, was it last year? When years just roll into one. It was either last year or the year before. I actually don't know anymore. But I wrote my
You're
memoir.
that busy.
Exactly, look at me, I've been that busy. But I think what stood out was, from writing that, I have definitely done a lot in my life to prove other people wrong. And although that has been fruitful, I think it has given me that, yeah, let's, screw you. If you don't think I'm going to be able to do it, then I'm going to prove you wrong. And like I said, that has really benefited me, but it's not necessarily good for the soul. And I think now that I'm 38 and now that I would say more settled, well, maybe a bit more settled. Now I'm a little bit more settled in my self-worth and what I want out of life. I've kind of reevaluated it and I've thought, well, that's really good. That go-getter, that yes person's really good. But actually, it was a bit of a bit like Beyonce and Sasha Fierce. That Samantha that was there to project that onto the world, and she served a purpose. But now I'm getting to grips with the real Samantha and what actually makes me happy. And a lot of that is setting boundaries with work commitment, setting boundaries with what I want out in life. So yes, I have had this really fruitful existence up until now. But I think what's really quite nice is even just in the past 18 months, I feel the most content and the most settled with who I am as a person. I reconnected with that innate Samantha, before the world got to her, before, I was, subject to ableism, subject to discrimination, and that kind of pure spirit. So yeah, that's where I am in my life now.
And yeah, I feel like I'm also 38, and it's just kind of, I feel like everything you just said was just such good advice for yourself on what you would have done differently or how you would have approached it. But I'd love to know what's one misconception that you have to say about disability that you'd like to debunk.
Oh gosh. I mean, there's so many misconceptions, isn't there? I think I did a lot of when I entered the world of media, I moved from a rural town in the northwest of England. I moved 12 years ago to London. I quit my job. I was working in a school and I literally it happened so fast that I went from, thinking that this was my life and this is my path, and then having an opportunity to move to London. So I literally uprooted my whole life and just kind of followed stardom, as you will, and I guess I talked a lot at the beginning of my career, a lot about relationships and a lot about sex and disability, but that was very much, I think looking back, I felt a bit vulnerable then, and it's something that I advocate for now. I talk a lot, in the work that I do now about sexual harassment and abuse, and as a sexual assault survivor myself, I talk a lot about that, and I talk about autonomy and the importance of understanding disabled people's needs when it comes to relationships and owning their own body. So I think a lot of what I've done in my early career was around dating and disability, and the fact that yes, we can have sex, and yes, we do have desires, and yes, we do have needs. And I think there is a place for that, because that is a big misconception, like that we are unlovable or no one wants to. I mean, am I allowed to curse on this podcast or not?
I don't know if
I'll bleep it out. I'll bleep it out. I've literally had people say to me, like, who would want to beep you, who would want to like I said, a lot of my advocacy early on was very much to do with that, to do with like saying, hey, we deserve love, we deserve to feel sensual, we deserve to get a bit kinky and all that. And I think over the years, what I've kind of advocated for has kind of changed and shifted. And I think the biggest misconception, gosh, it's so difficult because there are so many, I often say, like, when I deliver training as a consultant, I often say, like, half in the UK, half of households have a connection to someone who's disabled, and I'm sure that's very similar across the board. And I make the point because I touch upon the social model of disability, and I touch upon nothing about us without us, which is that beautiful civil rights quote. That disabled people, in everything that we do to support disabled people, it needs to be disability centric. Disabled people need to be at the heart of that. So when I say, half of households have a connection to someone who's disabled, people are like, well, why is that important? If you're talking about disability centric issues, why do we care about, people's families, friends? And I say, because we're often othered, we're often, completely labeled by our disability, and we forget ultimately the disabled people are exactly that. We're people at the end of the day. We have families, we have colleagues, we have friends, we have children, and if you discriminate against us, effectively that has a domino effect. So I think ultimately the biggest misconception is that our disability identity is the only identity that we have. I find it also interesting, a lot of people will say, like, I'm not defined by my disability. And I understand why they say that, because no one wants to be defined by one characteristic, because, if we're multifaceted. If you watch the film Shrek, listen to Donkey, we're an onion, everyone's got multiple layers. And I think that's true for disabled people. But my disability has defined me. My career is based around my disability. Everything I do in a disabling world comes back to my disability, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing.
It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. It's you, and it's your genuine self. And
Absolutely. I often say, like, if you've got a child that's never grown up with a sibling or a television, they don't know what they're missing. And I feel like, for me, I've never walked, I've never not used a wheelchair, so I don't sit there, and it's really hard. It's hard for non-disabled people to perhaps contemplate, but I don't wake up in the morning and look at my wheelchair and think, that thing again. Of course I have down days, of course I have days where I'm like, I had one of those days this morning, literally this morning I had one of those, if it weren't for my disability or a disabling world, this probably wouldn't be happening right now. So I do have those moments, but also, they are fleeting. They're not something that I sit there and ruminate on.
I love asking this question, but in a few sentences, what does accessibility mean to you?
Accessibility, I think, for me, there can be no equality without equity. I think that's something that I've learned the more I've got to know my own community. And I went to a party a few years back, and it was run by two disabled business entrepreneurs, Purple Go Agency, which is they look at underrepresentation in advertisements, and they held a party to celebrate disabled people. And it was like a room full. I would say like 98% of the people invited there had some sort of disability or neurodivergence. And it was beautiful, but what was lovely about it is all our needs were very, very different. So for me as a wheelchair user, having step-free access, having an accessible bathroom, having what do you call it? We call it a lift. Not an escalator. What do you call it in America? I keep forgetting.
We call it a platform
Elevator.
lift or an elevator.
Yeah, there we go. That's what inclusion is for me. But for my neurospicy friends, that's neither here nor there, for them. So I think equity is something that often gets forgotten about. I read an article on something called targeted universalism. So for anyone who's watching this or listening to this, if you are a bit of a geek like me and you want to know more about how you can ensure a more equitable world, then go and Google targeted universalism. It's a bit of a like a long kind of technical term, but it's quite an interesting concept.
And one of the things I love about you is your voice is so powerful. You have a large social media following. You're in the digital world, and I'd love to know Do you feel like there's enough accommodations within the digital world for people with disabilities?
Gosh, I mean, I've openly said how much I loathe social media. I think I'm on that cusp of not to say that age necessarily impacts this, but I'm definitely on the cusp of not being someone who technology, as you know yourself, comes naturally to me. So it is a bit of a double-edged sword for me. I do it because I recognize the power in being able to be present online, and for all its woes, for all the trouble that social media has, what I've found quite beautiful and quite organic are young disabled content creators really changing the narrative. Whereas, people like you and I have probably had to change the narrative in real time, and that has been quite difficult because sometimes we can't physically be in spaces. So how can you be at the table when you can't even reach the table? So I think social media has definitely brought about a different culture, or had a positive impact on that cultural shift that we need. How I think we are failing, aside from, I mean, with regards to reasonable adjustments, and every year on the 16th of May we've got GAD, oh my goodness, what does GAD stand for? Accessibility awareness. Yes.
Global Accessibility Awareness Day.
Thank you very much. I'm rubbish with abbreviations, which is wonderful, and that's all great. And all social media, or there's been a conscious effort to make these spaces more accessible with captioning and so on and so forth. I think where we're failing disabled people is protecting them. I still see a heck of a lot of ableism online that is, often not banned or dismissed. And I think the main reason is most people still don't understand what the word ableism is. That is the biggest barrier.
And I always love asking this question as well, but what's your life motto?
So my life motto, I actually stole it from my sister, and it was, yeah. Okay. Can I have two? So the first one, and they're both from my sister. So the first one is, if you do something, no matter how big or small, every single day, you'll get close to your end goal, no matter what your end goal is. And she gave me this piece of information when I moved to London. I did my first film. The film won like loads of awards in America. I thought I was going to get an Oscar. I thought my career was in the bag. I was like, yeah, I'm set up for life. I'm going to be super famous, super rich, amazing. And it didn't work out like that. It didn't work out. And I slipped into a depression. I probably started drinking way too much. I got in with a bad crowd of individuals. I wasn't in a good place, and then I started to really, kind of judge myself quite a lot and think that I wasn't being proactive. My mental health was really stopping me from, progressing. I was in a bit of a rut, and my sister gave me that little bit of information. She went, even if you do something like send an email today, or open up, this is when Twitter was about to start, go on that Twitter thing that everyone's talking about, set up a profile. That's one thing. And it gave me permission not to be so harsh on myself. And like, even me, I remember at the time I wrote an email to a disability magazine, and I said, hi, I've got this art, I've just written something, can I share it with you, and would you want to print it? And that one email from me just literally making notes of something I felt that day. I worked with the magazine. They literally went into liquidation last year. So I worked with them for over 8 years, and that was one email that I sent. So that's my first advice. And then quickly, my second advice comes from my sister. Again, when I was having a bit of body dysmorphia, I really struggled with people staring at me in the street. I was around 17 years old. Very, very difficult time for any young adult. And I went to, you've got IKEA, haven't you? My mum and sister, they dragged me to IKEA, and I remember being in such a vile mood. I really like fashion, and I really like makeup. So even though I was in this really low place, I still made myself presentable because I liked doing it for me. And I remember being there, and everyone was just staring at me. Not necessarily more than they normally would, but I was more aware of it. And when I got out into the car park, I had a meltdown. I burst into tears. and my sister, she knelt down next to me, and my sister's quite, if we were the Spice Girls, I was Baby Spice and she was like Sporty Spice. So, you know, much more into, you know, sports and a bit of a tomboy, I guess. And, you know, not necessarily as fashion forward as I was. And she knelt next to me and she said, you know, do you ever wonder that whether people are staring at you because they really like your hat or the lipstick that you're wearing or the fact that you can put an outfit together so seamlessly without thinking, you know? And ever since then, I always change how I view the world. You know, people can stare because they're ignorant, people can stare because they're horrible people, but people can also stare because they genuinely want to know where your handbag's from, you know?
Well, Samantha, thank you so much for being our guest today on accessiBe's Spotlight Sessions.
Oh,
I
thank
love your
you.
voice, love what you're doing.
That went by fast, didn't it? See, I'm always good at giving the answers. There's always way too much coming out of this mouth.
You did a great job. And to all of our guests, thank you so much for staying to the end of accessiBe's Spotlight Sessions. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and follow us at accessiBe_community. And Samantha, again, thank you again. And for all of our guests, thank you for staying to the end. Bye, everyone. Bye, Samantha.